Let's put the new big gun of the Krieg through its paces then. How strong is the artillery team in game? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Astra Militarum once more, and in this video I thought we'd take a focused look at the new and shiny artillery team, soon to be deployed on tabletops around the world, following the launch of the Death Korps of Krieg box. In this video I thought we'd take a look at the model, talk briefly about the miniature, then go through the unit profile in Astra Militarum, weigh up its stats and compare the damage of the different variants and what they're good against, and talk through all the synergies that can get a little bit more out of it in Codex Astra Militarum. Jumping straight in, and the artillery team is basically a Death Korps of Krieg massive great big towed artillery gun. To me this one really feels like the spiritual successor to a whole bunch of Forge-World artillery pieces. Perhaps the Earthshaker and Medusa carriage batteries being the most notable recently, but they did have quad guns and heavy mortars as well. And while maybe not being the exact same miniature as a whole bunch of those, I feel like they really captured the feel of it quite well. Initially it's just been released in that Death Korps of Krieg launch box, and still soon be coming on sale individually, when the Astra Militarum Codex goes on sale itself alongside the individual box sets for the stuff in the big army set. As models go, it was definitely a really well received one for the Imperial Guard. I think they did a great job of capturing the feel of the previous artillery pieces, and you can assemble it in 4 different ways. There's 3 crewmen manning the gun, one of which you can have firing his las gun from the sort of footplate of the thing, other ones carrying some massive shells and munitions about, and you can have the different munitions look different for each of the different weapons if you want. I think that the wall of sandbags that they've got going is quite a fun one as well. As it goes, I think it's safe to say it was pretty well received. It was voted as one of the best of the new Krieg range on a recent poll that I did. Quite a fun little diorama, and I think if you did want to adapt it for a regiment that wasn't just Death Korps, a few head swaps on the crewmen and a Cadian paint job could have it fitting right in with the Cadian shock troops if you wanted to. Let's get into its rules for the new Astra Militarum Codex though, and as per the soon to be released digital points, these things are apparently going to be 95 points each, so 20 points more than they were printed in the Codex at 75. For that points cost you get perhaps a surprisingly sturdy artillery piece really. It's toughness 7 with a 3+ save and 10 wounds, which is honestly far more than I was expecting for that kind of profile. I was guessing it might be a bit more in line with the previous big guns, maybe 7 wounds and a 4+ save perhaps, but it does mean that if your opponent does manage to get an angle on these and take some shots at it, they aren't going to get taken down just by a few scattered anti-tank shots. Otherwise they can move a little bit at movement 3, and I guess in theory could move to go 6 inches, and they do have the infantry keywords to be able to go through ruined walls and things. I can't help but think that must take quite a lot of time and effort for the crew if they have to rebuild those sandbags wherever they go. In general though, due to the profiles having the heavy keyword, I can't really see many people really wanting to move them, probably just set up out of line of sight if at all possible, and then just keep firing all game long. It's probably not the single best thing to entrust the entire home objective security to, but if it looks like your opponent wouldn't be able to get to it, it can still capture that with an OC3, though any sort of squad is usually going to outcompete it if they get onto it and contest. Finally, keywords wise, as well as the infantry keyword, it's got artillery, the grenade keyword, not that it's very likely to use it, and the regiment keyword, so it can be affected by infantry style orders, and regiment does mean that it can do a fair few synergies and stratagem things with a bunch of the detachments. Being an artillery piece that's often going to be hidden though, a lot of things are a bit niche on it. Before we get into its weapon profiles and damage comparisons, I'll just give a quick minute to shout out to today's video sponsor in Toy Snowman, a Canadian-based collectible and gaming store who's been recently building up their Warhammer 40k range after seeing a lot of popularity from their range of Joy Toy 40k figures. They sell Games Workshop's Warhammer 40k range at 15% off prices that you see on the Warhammer store, and ship nationwide at a flat $15 shipping, which goes to free for orders over $150 Canadian. The web store is fairly easy to navigate and search things in, though in particular if you want any Games Workshop items at 15% discount, they can back order them, emailing this address at sales@toysnowman.com if you did want any one Games Workshop miniature not in stock. For Krieg collectors, they have some of the last supplies of the Death Korps of Krieg army set, which is sold out in the Games Workshop web store at the moment. They're still in stock at time of recording, and hopefully they'll still be there in a few hours' time when the video goes out. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video, and feel free to check them out if you want some discount Warhammer in Canada. Back to the big gun profiles though, and let's look through the different variants. All of the weapon profiles are ballistic skill 5+ with the blast, heavy and indirect fire keywords, so that means that if they can see their targets they'll be hitting on a 4+ if they don't move, and if they can't see their targets they'll hit on a 5+, so usually want to get a take aim order from somewhere, as that's literally going to make them an extra 50% more efficient. The blast keywords and everything will give them a bit more punch against ranked up infantry, and it's quite nice for taking down things like 10-man units holding objectives like say some cultists or an enemy guard squad or something. In any case, for the first and the biggest and scariest of the gun profiles is the siege cannon. This one feels like it's got the look and feel of a mini Earthshaker. that weirdly seems to hit quite a lot harder than it. It's got D6 shots at strength 12, AP -2 and a big damage 3, and particularly given the nerf to the Manticore, it does seem to be the artillery profile if you want to hit actual tough things out of line of sight, and being general purpose is a really big selling point, as not every enemy army is going to have important light infantry to take down. We'll look through a damage comparison in just a second, but next up we have the heavy quad launcher. This one again feels like a bit of a reinterpretation of a classic. 2d6 shots at strength 5, AP 0, damage 1 with twin links. Pretty much the exact same profile as the Wyvern's mortars after they lost the ignore cover. So this one's designed to thin out light infantry. This should be at least alright against anything with bad saves, given the twin linked rule. Most of the hits should wound. Next up, we've got the heavy mortar, d6 plus 3 shots at strength 8, AP -1 and damage 2. A fairly nice general purpose profile that's going to be fine against anything that's toughness 8 or lower. Less AP and less damage than the siege cannon, but essentially an extra 3 shots. So compared with the siege cannon, it's not going to be as good against heavy things, but will be a bit better against lighter infantry. I quite like the look of the heavy mortar, certainly reminds me of the ones that were mounted on the backs of the Griffin tanks when they were a thing. I still have a good number of those. Finally, last and least for damage profiles, we have the multiple rocket launcher, a whole battery of missiles to fire off all over the table. Though somehow Games Workshop have decided that a strength characteristic of 2 is going to be appropriate for a rocket slamming into you. They get d6 plus 3 shots at strength 2, AP -1 and damage 1, but the anti-infantry 3+ profile. So that profile basically means that they're going to be alright against infantry and terrible against everything else. With the way that they've written the special rules though, they barely even get into alright against infantry. While we're on the weapon profiles, before we look at special rules and things, here's a comparison of the damage output against a bunch of different targets. For these ones I'm assuming a take aim order, and the termagants are in a squad of 10, the intercessors and terminators in a squad of 5. With the blast keyword on the go though, they're all gaining a similar sort of amount. As you can see from the damage profiles, I don't really think that they've written them particularly well. Against the lightest targets with a Tyranid termagant or say a enemy guardsman, all the gun profiles are more or less quite well balanced against each other, everything from the, in theory, tank-busting siege cannon to the ones that are supposed to be dedicated anti-light infantry with a quad launcher and multiple rockets. The winner in that category is the heavy mortar, but not by all that much. You deal around about 2 or 3 slain on average with that. Then against regular Space Marines, that one's more or less a tie between the heavy mortar and the siege cannon. The heavy mortar winning by a tiny bit, you average around about 1 slain Space Marine there. But then against anything tougher than that, it's going to be a pretty clear win for the siege cannon, both with the extra AP and the damage 3. For the Terminators, the siege cannon will kill around about 2 Terminators every 3 turns on average, so it's still not going to be taking down entire squads, but does way better than any of the other profiles by a long way. And the same is true against, say, a standard toughness 10 3+ save vehicle like an enemy Space Marine Gladiator tank. It's about a 2 wound average turn on turn, where the next best is the heavy mortar and it's significantly less than 1. It does seem that it's kind of badly balanced with the rules writing. The siege cannon either wins or is really similar against everything but the light infantry, and it's not even really all that far behind against them either. While we're on comparisons, I thought it would be interesting to throw in the bombast field guns into the mix, mainly just for the context that they sort of make the heavy mortar profile really look quite redundant as well, given that they give you d6 shots each at strength 7, AP 1, damage 2, so a similar sort of damage profile, but you get 2 guns, so 2 copies of the blast keyword. In any case, with the same take aim order, they basically just outcompete the heavy mortar against all targets, being significantly better against hordes of light models. They wound on a 2+ and have lots of models in the squad to trigger blast, but still win against everything else as well. As a result, for the expected damage output, it feels like the decision is between the siege cannon to be a bit better against tough stuff and actually be relevant against them, or double down on clearing out lighter infantry. Finally, we have the supporting and special rules. The teams can fire in with 1 extra solitary las gun if something is within direct line of sight. Very unlikely to do anything, but will be kind of funny when it does. And in melee, they're super weedy with 3 attacks at strength 3, AP 0, damage 1. So basically, they really don't want to wind up in combat because they won't be able to shoot. They're not a vehicle, so they can't keep on firing. And they're certainly not going to be killing anything much in close combat. Finally, for their special rule, they have Remorseless Barrage. Unfortunately, not really the best of them. If you hit an enemy with an indirect weapon, they take a Battle Shock test, and infantry units are -1 to the test if they're hit by the multiple rocket launcher. I guess in theory that's supposed to make up for its terrible damage profile, but it really doesn't. Kind of a shame they got a Battle Shock rule, though I can't say I'm too surprised for artillery. With the way that rule works at the moment, it's only generally going to be all that good for preventing stratagems on the target unit, and even if you did desperately want to deny a stratagem, you don't even have a particularly good chance, as they'll probably just pass the Battle Shock anyway. Overall, putting that together, I'd say the greatest strengths are the siege cannon, as being some of the best anti-heavy indirect fire in the Guard Codex, and when it's got an order I think it holds up quite well against most other things in 40k. Not really that much is any good against taking out tanks or tough stuff out of line of sight. They are surprisingly sturdy on the defence, and out a battle shock test for what that's worth, though it isn't much, and can get a few buffs to its firepower with various different things. A few choice guard units can help them out, as can a couple of things from the detachments, though not that much. For downsides, the gun profiles do seem badly balanced, as each cannon just wins overall. It's got very slow movement, so it's not likely to be getting anywhere swiftly around the board, and they'll want screening so that the opponent doesn't engage them in melee somehow. They are quite order dependent, as their damage gets really quite terrible if you don't manage to give them the 4+ to hit, and even with the order, even the siege cannon still pays a massive premium for its damage versus direct fire things. Big tanks with big guns deal far more damage, you really are paying for the ability to put that damage anywhere. Talking of support though, there are a few things that can make them a bit more efficient. As mentioned, they do basically need orders, and that order's almost always going to be take aim. I guess you could have move to actually make them move somewhere at a semi-reasonable speed. Maybe if some secondary objective turns up, and they're the only ones that can do it for some reason. Orders got a fair bit more easy to come by in the latest guard book. Perhaps as the most easily efficient source of them, you could have Ursula Creed, maybe even leading a battery of 3 of them if you'd really like. She also has 3 stratagems that could be handed out to the big gun teams, or you could have them broadcast in by command squads or even Lord Solar from afar, if that made more sense. For generic stratagems, I feel like they're not likely to be using grenades all that much. I guess you could throw in the odd command point reroll on a 1 for the number of shots of a siege cannon, or a 1 to wound maybe. But I think I'd only ever do it if the unit living or dying was absolutely game critical, like say for example taking out the last few models that were holding an objective and denying a bunch of victory points, or this one's the last thing that can take out an enemy target that's only got 3 wounds left or something. As well as the kind of necessary orders, Guard do have plenty of datasheet rules that can make things hit extra hard. Sentinels might not directly buff indirect fire more so than anything else anymore, but reroll 1s to hit could be pretty nice as a plus 17% damage boost. They are the sort of unit that's likely to be ranging ahead of the army and might get unusual lines of sight as well, so could help cool down the barrage. Otherwise, the Lehman Russ Exterminator could hand out extra AP, or the Hellhound could strip cover, and both of those are quite big deals against AP2, particularly when you know your opponent's going to be getting cover if you're firing indirect. If you just had the 1 artillery team, I feel like the buffs wouldn't be worth it, but maybe if you had a whole battery of 3 of them, that might tip the scales enough. If you did decide to do big investment things with them, 3 siege cannons buffed by a sentinel marking their target, and maybe a Lehman Russ Exterminator pipping it with AP. And between that, 3 siege cannons average, say, 8 dead termagants, 4 or 5 slain space marines, around 3 slain terminators, or 8 wounds to a toughness 10 3+ save vehicle. That feels like it's getting to at least somewhat respectable numbers for artillery. Certainly not terrible for 300 points, but that is quite a lot of units you're all investing in making these guns work, particularly once you've accounted for the orders that they'll all need. For the buffs that they can get with detachments, it seems that Games Workshop decided not to make a dedicated artillery one, which might have been sensible for actually keeping these balanced in other detachments, but weirdly enough it perhaps seems that the Bridgehead Strike might be one of the single bests for them. That's the Scion and Infantry one, and given that these guys have the infantry keywords, they get to reroll 1s to hit natively, so won't need sentinels to mark targets for them. They also have a 1 command point stratagem for an infantry unit to strip cover from something that's visible to them, so you could have some dropping in scions, light something up with special weapons, and then remove cover from their target, and then hopefully follow up with a battery of a trio of siege guns or similar. And you could get the numbers that we talked about on the previous page, but for only a 1 command point and orders cost, as opposed to needing a big tank and a sentinel to mark them. Otherwise though, for the other detachments, the Siege Regiment has one that can strip cover with incendiary shells. It maybe feels like a bit of a secondary option besides the slow movement one, but in some turns later on in the game it might be better. There's also a fire into melee one, which feels all very fluffy for these guys, but I feel like a lot of the time you might as well just fall back. The recon detachment makes them get even sturdier, always getting cover, though it's probably not going to be the hardest thing for them to do. In that one they could have a bit better charge protection versus some of the other detachments. There's a 1 command point 1 to deny reserves out to 12 inches, which doesn't seem useless for a big gun sat on the home field, and a 1 command point 1 for a -2 to charges, which again could be nice enough if people deep strike close. Finally, for the combined regiment, they could be an interesting choice with the Fields of Fire stratagem. In general, they won't typically tend to get the lethal hits, as you have to be visible to your target, which sort of defeats the point of paying for the expensive indirect, though I guess against certain armies that don't have lots of anti-tank firepower, they might be able to deploy in line of sight and mix it up a bit. Fields of Fire does seem quite nice for them though, just because I feel like quite a lot of the time you might have a great big tank that just wants to deal a bunch of damage to a target, and they don't have a regiment unit to coordinate with. The big guns could be that regiment unit, so you could get both the tank's damage and the siege cannon with an extra pip of AP. Maybe in theory, if you use the tank as a Lehman Russ exterminator to hand out the AP buff to everyone else, that siege cannon could even be hitting with an effective AP -4 against the target, which does seem pretty scary on paper. You just have to fire the exterminator at the target first. Beyond that, they could be used as reinforcements that don't really seem like the best choice versus some Kazakins, Scions, or a big 20-man infantry block. And there's a few other ways to manipulate and get orders, but in general, paying command points for orders doesn't tend to be the best idea if you can just buy them in beforehand. Overall though, with both the units and their buffs put together, it definitely feels like there's some interest at 95 points, but it feels like artillery might remain a little bit more rarish in more general purpose guard lists at first impressions. I feel like it's the sort of thing that could be quite finely balanced, where a whole trio of these could be alright, but maybe one of them is unlikely to be a particularly great idea on its own if you're not investing in big supporting buffs for them. As mentioned before, I feel like for competitors it's the bombast field guns or the field ordnance batteries that are the nearest rivals for them. They seem like better options versus the non-siege cannon guns, but I feel like the advantage of genuinely threatening things like Terminators and light vehicles is quite a nice advantage to have. In general, I'd say that if they're used intelligently, they could be an alright part of a list. What you get is basically some unreliable but fairly general purpose damage, and you just need to make the decision each turn as to exactly where that damage can be applied to most give you advantages in the game. Whether it's chewing through enemy objective grabbers that should usually be safe and forcing them to divert other units back to take those points, or maybe gambling on these guns being the thing to finish off a big enemy tank or monster that's down to just 3 wounds left, or hitting unusually fragile enemy units that are hiding out of line of sight. There's definitely a whole ton of possibilities, given that Bridgehead Strike seems to be doing rather well. That might be slightly good news for them. At least on paper it does seem fairly intimidating that a trio of these with some orders and then some infantry unit handing out a 1 command point stratagem, meaning that they averaged around about 4 or 5 slain Space Marines or around 3 Terminators for 285 points. That genuinely seems alright for indirect fire, and I could imagine that that could be pretty annoying to fight against, so maybe they'll see some play there. In any case though, look forward to hearing your takes on these. If you've got that Death Korps of Krieg box set coming in at some point, do you reckon that this one will be seeing all that much table time or not? In any case, I'll look forward to having a read over your comments later. As mentioned, a big thank you to Toy Snowman in Canada for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out for 15% off Warhammer, links down in the video description. In any case, I'll leave that one there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly be keeping a whole bunch of Astra Militarum videos coming over the next week or two. Hopefully time for a bunch more unit reviews and detachment thoughts. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see that. Otherwise, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page if you'd like to support more directly. Channel patrons get a few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.